Throughout history, China has been known as one of the most brutal places to suffer punishment for crimes committed. For examples of the brutality of the ancient Chinese dynasties, you need look no further than its code for criminals named the 5 Punishments for Slaves. Let's go back to ancient China. It's 4,000 years ago, and the period 2100 BC to 1600 BC, the Qia dynasty is in command as the first ever established form of Chinese government. The people of China are mainly peasant farmers, merchants, or craftsmen. Those in the ruling upper classes of society kept themselves far apart from the average Chinese citizen. So, basically the same as most countries around the world today. A government needs a way to punish its people for wrongdoing, and so the Chinese government set out a series of capital punishments for crimes committed, known as the 5 Punishments of Slaves. Unlike today, this term didn't refer to slaves as we understand it to, but any male in the Chinese Empire. That should give you a good idea what the Chinese ruling class thought of its subjects. The 5 Punishments of Slaves were in use for 4,000 years of Chinese history. Most of us don't even know 4,000 years of our country's history, but for China, this period just covered what we call ancient China. And although we know these punishments were set out in the Qia dynasty, it's not until the Shang dynasty, starting in 1600 BC, that we have the first recorded written history of ancient China and the carrying out of the 5 punishments. So, what were the 5 punishments for slaves? Punishment number 1. Mo or Qing, face and head tattoos. This punishment was considered particularly cruel, as in ancient China it was believed that if your skin was marked, you were no longer quite human. This, coupled with the inevitable shunning from law-abiding society, made this punishment cruel and ostracizing. Punishment number 2, Yi, cutting off the offender's nose without anesthetic. Ouch. Punishment number 3, Yue. Yue was a harsher form of Yi, where the offender's left or right foot, or both, were amputated, crippling them for life. Remember, most ancient Chinese citizens were peasant farmers. This not only humbled and shamed a criminal, but made it a lot harder to earn a living in the future. Punishment number 4, Gong. Castration. The men's testicles and penis were removed, and they were sent to live as a eunuch in the imperial palace. This form of punishment was most commonly used for those caught partaking in indecent behavior or those trying to incite rebellion. Punishment number 5, Da Pi, the death sentence. Da Pi was also called Qijing, meaning highest punishment. Let's pause here a minute and talk about the different methods of execution the ancient Chinese used for Da Pi. Often extensive and brutal, the ways of sentencing someone to death in China were creative and horrifying. Just a couple of ways in which execution was carried out included quartering, cutting the body into 4 pieces, boiling alive, tearing apart the body by attaching each limb to a chariot, cutting in 2, or lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts. These 5 punishments of slaves were the bedrock of the penal punishment system in ancient China. But what about the women? Well, the women had their own 5 punishments, although they were arguably a lot milder than those doled out to men. Let's take a look. The 5 punishments for women. Punishment number 1, Yingchong. The offender was forced to grind grain. Although not particularly fun, this method was more psychologically torturous, with the women expected to complete the task in a certain amount of time or be given another bucket. The longer the punishment took, the harder each bucket became to grind in the right amount of time. Punishment number 2, Zhangqing, the squeezing of fingers between sticks. Think of this like ancient thumbscrews. The woman's fingers would be trapped between sticks that were pulled taut by 2 court ushers in order to extract information or confessions. Punishment number 3, Zhangxing, beating with wooden staves. Punishment number 4, Shishi, forced suicide. Methods of self-execution in imperial China included cutting your throat, taking poison, or hanging yourself. Punishment number 5, Gongxing. Like the 4th penal punishment for men, gong, or castration, This punishment was given to women who were guilty of adultery or licentious behavior. But instead of castration, the woman was confined to a small room with no food until they eventually either outlived their punishment or died of starvation. Pretty gruesome all round. But as dynasties changed and we crept closer to modern day, so did the 5 punishments of slaves. Although the original brutal methods continued for over 2,000 years, through the Shang, Zhou, and Jin dynasties, they were eventually abolished during the reign of Emperor Wen of Han, 203 BC to 157 BC, in the Western Han dynasty, and later replaced by the less cruel 5 punishments for serfs. Emperor Han of Wen was allegedly persuaded to alter the 5 punishments for slaves by Chunyu Tiying, the daughter of a high-ranking official. After her father's wrongful conviction for the death of a noblewoman, Chunyu Tiying appealed to the emperor directly. Instead of the usual letter full of exclamations of her father's innocence, Tiying dedicated her writing to pointing out the cruelty implicit in the 5 punishments and offering to take her father's place and become a slave for life in his stead. Once a man is executed, he cannot come back to life. Once a man is mutilated, even if he proved to be innocent later, he would be disabled for life, and there is no way to reverse the suffering he experiences. Even if he wishes to start anew, he will be unable to do so. Emperor Wen of Han was so impressed by her words that he subsequently abolished 4 of the 5 punishments, removing all forms of mutilation and amputation from the list of Chinese penal punishments. Instead, criminals were whipped for their crimes, either with bamboo strips or sticks, with each crime bestowing a different number of lashes. The system of 5 punishments set out the basis for punishment in law across almost 4,000 years of Chinese history. And after the move from the 5 punishments for slaves to the 5 punishments for serfs, not much changed for centuries. But these were not the only methods of punishment used. Ancient China used a litany of other ways to punish their criminals. But we'll talk about that in another video. For more gruesome punishments and bizarre deaths, subscribe now to A Day in History channel. Or we'll come for your nose next.